Hi, and welcome to another episode of Eyes Wide Open. Today in the Hebrew calendar is the 10th of the Hebrew month of Tevet. In Hebrew we call it Asara Tevet, and it's a fast day. It's one of the fast days that the rabbis put together, and it is to mourn when the Babylonians came to conquer Israel, and ultimately they conquered Jerusalem and they burnt the temple to the ground. They did so in stages. It took them a while to pierce the thick walls of Jerusalem and then to make their way into the temple. And on the 10th of Tevet is when the Babylonian army surrounded Jerusalem. They had not yet been able to make their way into Jerusalem. That took them several months. But on this day, the 10th of Tevet, they surrounded Jerusalem. And since ultimately this siege of Jerusalem led to the destruction of the temple, we fast on this day to mourn this idea. But one of the ideas that Rebbe talked about, specifically on fast days, is that these days aren't only days of mourning, and perhaps even not primarily days of mourning. They're actually primarily days of potential. They're days that are very much associated with the concept of teshuvah, of repentance, of change, on positivity, an incredible day to really tap into positive energy and to turn things around. And to explain this idea in short, when it talks about why calamities happen at all to the Jewish people, Maimonides introduces a phrase from the Torah called keri. Keri means circumstance, it means cold. And the Torah talks about God says to Jewish people, if you treat me in a way of keri, I will treat you in a way of keri. In other words, if you treat me coldly and callously, you look around the world and I'm taking care of you, and you say, this is just happening, God's nothing to do with it, doesn't matter what I do, then God says, I'll treat you back in the same way, not as a punishment. If that's the way you want to see the world, that everything is just happenstance. So again, it's not that God says, I'll punish you. It's that God says that if you behave in such a way as if everything is happenstance, I'll behave likewise in such a way in which it will appear that everything's happenstance. You won't see my protection of you. And then things happen, calamities happen, which can all be explained away, or can all have very natural causes. But when we have the very emotional question, well, why didn't God step in and miraculously change things? God said, well, you were living a life and you were embracing this lifestyle as if I'm not here. So that's what I embraced back in turn. I honored your choices. You saw the world as a way in which I'm not that involved. So I hid the way that I am involved, and I concealed it, and therefore things happened. But the truth of the matter is that itself is just a facade. God is intimately involved in every single detail of the Jewish people, and He's always protecting the Jewish people. And even when things seem to be circumstance, it's just that God says, I'm going to conceal the way I'm involved in. You'll look at these events and you won't understand what they're truly about. They're going to look confusing and bewildering, but the truth is, I know what I'm doing. I have a plan. You're just not going to have any understanding of it. And as such, the truth behind, Maimonides continues, any calamity, any challenging time, no matter what it is, whether it's happening directly to us, whether it's going on around us, whatever it is, anything that's going on that is out of the ordinary, in truth carries, so Maimonides says, one central theme, which is it's a wake-up call. It's meant to wake us up and make us say, hey, the world doesn't just operate on its own. God is in charge of things, and we need to wake up and recognize that. And God starts small, and if the wake-up call doesn't do what it needs to do, He sends a stronger wake-up call, perhaps a more violent wake-up call, until eventually it succeeds in what it needs to do. So what that means is that each of these calamities we mourn on the three main facets, which we mourn three main calamities. The 10th of Tevet, which is today, we mourn the Babylonians surrounding and laying siege to Jerusalem. On the 17th of Tammuz, which is in the summer, we mourn them breaking through the walls of Jerusalem. And 3 weeks later, on the 9th of Av, we mourn the destruction of the temple. Each of those days, which were very, very sad days and very calamitous days, in truth were days where God was trying to wake us up. Those days were about God trying to get us to recognize we have the power to change things. Unfortunately, it wasn't successful, and since we didn't wake up, those events continued as they were. But what that means, and this is a key point, is that each of these fast days and each of these occurrences, although historically translated into very dark days. The true intent behind them were that they were days of potential. They were days that existed to wake us up and make us realize we have the power to change. And each year as we commemorate these days, we commemorate both themes. We commemorate the sadness and the destruction that happened in these days and the calamities that happened in these days and we're meant to mourn them. But on a deeper level, and perhaps most importantly, we commemorate and we remember these remain days of potential. These remain days of incredible unharnessed energy that we can tap into and use for positive purposes. And what that means in very, very simple English is each of these days are days for us to recognize we still don't have Mashiach. These calamities still have a lasting effect. The temple is still destroyed. The Jewish people are still out of Israel. And we need to turn this around. And now more than ever, we need to turn this around. As we remember that with thousands of years after these events, we're not going to have another year where next 10th of Tevet we have to mourn again. We want next 10th of Tevet that we'll be rejoicing with Mashiach. That's the theme behind each of these fast days. However, the Rebbe spoke about how the 10th of Tevet, in a certain way and from a certain point of view, carries a theme more than the other fast days. Because since each fast day, as we said, has two themes, has a theme of potential and a theme of tragedy. There's what happened, which is a tragedy, and there's what could have happened, which was a potential for positivity, and both of those remain in effect. Depending on the day, one perhaps is a little bit more expressed than the other. For example, the 9th of Av, which is a very tragic day, and it carries and the most tragic events in Jewish history, we mourn them on that day. It's easier to see the tragedy in that day and harder to see the positive potential in that day. By contrast, on the 10th of Tevet, it's easier to see the potential because in this day, the siege hadn't yet begun. They began to lay the siege at that day. They surrounded the walls of Jerusalem. They hadn't yet made their way through. They wouldn't for several months. They hadn't actually yet burned anything down. They were just beginning that. And it was a potential day. This was a day that could and actually did lead to much tragedy. But it's a day that is entirely about potential because the tragedy doesn't happen yet. Not on this day, it happens later. So it's much easier for us to see the potential for positive energy and how this day is a day connected with us trying to turn things around and bring Mashiach specifically on this day. And to conclude with one final thought, the Rebbe emphasizes how this idea is why the 10th of Tevet is very much connected with 10. It's a 10th day of the month, of the 10th month. We count months not from Tishrei, the beginning of the year, but from Nisan. The first month is Nisan. If you count from Nisan, Tevet is a 10th month. So it's a 10th day of the 10th month. And 10 is a number very much associated with Mashiach. It says when Mashiach comes, we'll have a harp of 10 strings. And the idea of 10, in short, Kabbalistically, has to do with 10 characteristics, 10 character traits in each of our souls. And 10 represents the fullness and harmony of full expression of ourselves in positive ways, a full expression of the world in positive ways. And therefore this day, which is a 10th of the 10th month, expresses this idea of today is the day is a day for potential to turn things around and lead to the true harmony and true expression of the purpose of existence through Mashiach.